Hi folks, with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel. Thank you for joining this live stream. In this chat, I'd like to talk about the fallacy that globalization and globalism lifts millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people out of poverty around the globe. And I'd like to talk that through and demonstrate how it's either robbing Peter to pay Paul, or it's just moving people around on the general ledger. It's moving the problem around or giving it a different name. And there's hardly any people being lifted out of poverty in any organic or natural sense that's providing a net increase to world wealth. So let me just go through a few things on that. Now, if a subsistence farmer living in some rural, India or China or any third world country for that matter, there are hundreds of millions of subsistence farmers where they grow just enough food to stay alive. Maybe they do a small surplus, which they then barter with the other locals in the area, and they may barter for, they may have a surplus of grain, for example, and they barter that for, say, some fuel or something else, or seeds for the next year's planting and that sort of thing. So it's a subsistence barter economy. No money is exchanged. So in terms of a balance sheet, like a business balance sheet recording the movements of money, these people don't even exist in the world economy. They're not recorded in any way because they're A, subsistence, and B, bartering. So until they can be brought into the moneyed economy, they just don't exist in the world economy. They're just on some sort of periphery, some outer planet. Now, if you move one of those people or any of those people from the subsistence farm into the city, or bring them to the West, even as an example, but if you move them into the city and they become toilet cleaners, for example, or they sell newspapers on a street corner, or they do anything where they're paid a wage, then suddenly they have gone from being a subsistence farmer making no income. This is according to the numbers. A subsistence farmer making no income. Suddenly they're now making an income. Now they're making an income of, for example, $2 a day. So it can be recorded now statistically that person, that individual, has now been moved or lifted out of poverty in a numerical sense, in a money numerical sense. Now they haven't actually been lifted out of poverty at all, because they've moved to the city and they're now living 20 to a room and in squalid conditions. By the time they've paid their rent and paid off all the goons and the corrupt officials and that sort of thing, they're left with basically nothing. So their quality of life has gone through the floor. It's plummeted because they were out on a farm and they knew everybody, and they were eating what they produced, and they would have been, to a point at least, healthy enough, aside from famine and those sorts of things that seem to visit these places fairly regularly. So they've come into the city, though their quality of life has declined, and they've got barely nothing at the end of the week to show for their labours. They're also working long days, or required to work long days, or they won't get paid, unlike where they would work long days, say, in planting and harvest time, but may otherwise work only a few hours a day doing whatever on the farm. Maybe there are seasons where they hardly do any work at all, but when they move to the city, they've got a lot more working hours, a lot more where they've got to attend a certain spot and place and time and that sort of thing. So their quality of life has really gone downhill, seriously downhill. But according to the way poverty is recorded, they're now being lifted out of poverty. They're now kicking ass. They're doing all right. They're kicking ass. They've gone from zero income to $2 a day income. Wow, what an achievement. Globalization is kicking ass. Look what we've done. Look what we've achieved here. This peasant is now a player in the game. Of course, that the reality is that's bullshit. But that's the sleight of hand, or the 5-card trick that they play when they do these sorts of numbers. That person hasn't been lifted out of poverty. They're as much in poverty as they ever were. In fact, their situation is they're about in the same level of poverty, but their quality of life has declined immeasurably. So there are those sorts of that's probably the main area of how they do it. The second method that we all know about is the mass migration to the West, where you take a subsistence peasant and you bring them into the West again as a toilet cleaner, or maybe to flip burgers in McDonald's, or be a greeter on the door at Kmart or Walmart or something like that, and or some low-paid flunky job. But it's now recorded that they're in the world economy. The world economy is now grown by a fraction because it now has another worker and another consumer. Maybe if these people live frugally enough, they can send some money back to Africa or the rural India or rural Mexico, wherever they've come from. They can send some money back there, and that money can then be spent. So the world economy has increased by a small fraction every time you get someone off a subsistence farm. And to give you an idea, there are still more than 2 billion. I mean, just billion with a B. There are more than 2 billion subsistence farmers in the world. That just gives you an idea as to how many. There's 25 to 27% of the world's population are living as subsistence farmers. Some are doing a little bit better than that. They've moved a little bit beyond subsistence, but they'd be borderline just in the next category above subsistence. So you're looking at the thick end of 3.5 billion with a B, 3.5 billion people that are living in subsistence conditions or near subsistence conditions. Now, the idea of the globalists is if you can bring any of these into the world economy, into any sort of job, and they're earning an income, they're now lifted out of poverty in the way that poverty is measured and defined in the World Bank numbers and that sort of thing. But that's just bullshit. That's not the case. In order to make their lives viable when they come to the West, they have to claim numerous social welfare benefit schemes, which the white taxpayers subsidise. So that's not really a net gain at all to the world economy, or a minuscule net gain, even if there is one. The other way is to transfer Western jobs from the West to these developing economies, China and India and so on. Vietnam, and but that steals money from the West. It just steals Western wealth and the wealth of the Western citizens, the working class and the middle class, and just moves it offshore to these places to, say, produce manufactured goods, as an example. But for that, the Western standard of living has to decline, just so you can raise the standard of living up somewhere else. So that's not a net gain at all, far from it. In order to make up the shortfall in standards of living in the West, they then increase credit, so people get hugely in debt and try and maintain or hang on, by their fingernails to the standard of living they used to have by increasing debt. So that they're just swimming in debt in order just to get by. Whether that's college students getting into huge debt for some bullshit degree or whatever, it doesn't matter. There's huge debt there to try and make their lives in the West work, because the standard of living is declining based on not only sending jobs offshore, which they've done by the multi-million, but also middle class, middle manager jobs, and hitherto middle class jobs are being sent offshore. For example, computer programming and things like that. So this is not a net gain either. It's just moving the problem around. It's taking money here to move it there, and nothing in a net sense is achieved. Maybe it will over some longer term, 50, 75, 100 years or something like that. But for the moment, the increase in new wealth is much slower, much slower than the moving of wealth around. So now the World Bank and those sort of guys said, well, look at the amount the trade is increasing. Trade has increased threefold since this date or that date. Therefore, wealth must be increasing. But that's bullshit as well, because the way supply chains work now, every time items are moved and handled in one place, then moved again, then this is double and triple and quadruple and quintuple counted. It's not counted as one movement and one product, which it was previously. Now supply chains, things are being so multiple counted all over the place, which gives the impression that trade is really booming and so on. The transport of goods around is booming in the sense that there's products are assembled here and parts are manufactured there, then moved to this other location for finishing and so on. That all goes on, but that means there's just multiple movements of the same goods in effect, and there's no additional final or completed finished products coming out of it. It's just multiple movements which keep moving stuff around to low wage countries and that sort of thing. So really this lifting people out of poverty, in summary, is utter bullshit, and there is a small amount of people coming out of poverty, but that just means there's money being taken elsewhere to make that happen. So until the globalists understand that there has to be an increase in new wealth, not moving wealth around, not stealing it from here to give to there, not moving some poor old farmer from his subsistence farm and do some shit job in the cities or something like that. Not that, but until there's an increase in new wealth, then the world isn't any better off. And because of these multiple movements around and the way the services industries have developed, the wealth is accruing very tightly to the people at the 0.1%, not the 1%, but the 0.1%, the 1 in 1,000. And so anyway, that's my view, and I'd be interested in seeing your comments below. You've been with Tassus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.